everybody wants to know, should I form my company in Wyoming? No, everyone wants to know, where should they form their company? It's obviously different for everyone, but how do we go about deciding where to go start learning where we should form our companies?
All right. So let me dispel a myth to start, if I may. Can I do that? Can we
Yes.
go a little,
Yes, do it.
I just want to
Mythbusters.
Mythbusters right here, legal Mythbusters. Okay. If you live in the state of California and you think that forming a Wyoming company and operating out of your Wyoming company, even though you live in California, is going to somehow basically remove all California tax obligations, you're mistaken. That is completely false. Okay. Your income tax obligations, anything obligations, have very little to do with the state your company is incorporated in. Believe me, if it did, every company would be incorporated in the great state of Wyoming. Microsoft, GE, we would have all just gone to Wyoming, right? And we wouldn't have to deal with,
That's a good point.
Right?
Most of them are like, what, where they started or Delaware?
No, yeah. I mean, Microsoft's actually Washington with Nevada, I think. But a lot of them are Delaware. And there's a reason for that. It is tax related, but it has to do with taxation of intellectual property. But that's a long story. But also because Delaware, more importantly, has very, very good corporate law. Because Delaware was the incorporation state a long time ago and has been for so long. And if you have a corporate law dispute, you want Delaware law to be applied. So, companies gravitate towards Delaware, although less and less so. I'm seeing some big companies form in other states, but not many.
So we got to end the myth first before we go deep. If there's 0% state tax in that state, you can't just form a company there and not pay any state taxes. Was that essentially what you were saying?
Right. The way it works when you have multiple states is if you pay tax to one state, imagine a pizza, right? Now, if you were to take all the states together, they can all tax the pizza, right? One pizza. They can't, each individually tax it, right? They can only tax their slice of the pizza, I should say, right? So if you imagine a pizza, each state is entitled to a slice of the pizza. Right. So whenever you have multiple states kind of competing against each other, there's going to be one state giving way to the other state for their tax. Right. So one's going to have a superior right to tax. The fact that Wyoming doesn't have a tax just means that, if your home state's California, California could tax all of it. Now, if Wyoming did have a tax and had some right to tax it, then there would be some giveaway for California not to be able to tax all of it, if that makes sense. People who live in two states like New York and Connecticut understand what I'm talking about. We deal with this every year, come tax time, when we have to take a credit for taxes paid in the state of New York against our home state of Connecticut, because Connecticut gives way to New York, although I don't actually think that they should, but that's another story. Nobody cares.
So what you're saying is if you live on California's piece of pizza, you can't just set up a shop on Wyoming's and say, oh yeah, I'm in Wyoming. You're in California.
Right. Even worse is that California has the supreme right to tax the pizza because you live there. Right.
So it's based on how many days you spend in a state and a couple other things too, right? But basically, where do you actually live, not where is your company formed?
Absolutely. We're very simplified. We're talking about a very specific type of taxpayer, these, kitchen table enterprise type folks. It gets more complicated, but, the states have what's called apportionment formulas where, the most simplest formulas we have these days are like, for example, if you take your sales in a state divided by your sales everywhere, that's a percentage. So if 10% of your sales are in California, although for most Amazon sellers, it's more like 15 or 20 these days, but let's say it's 10% and you'd say you made $1 million. Well, California would only have a right to tax 10% of your sales, but for the fact that you live in California, which gives them the right to tax 100%. But if you didn't live in California and for some reason you had a nexus in California and 10% of your sales were in California, they would actually have a right to tax 10% of your income. And I'm oversimplifying this. And does that help? I kind of probably did that a little bit backwards.
Yes, that does help to ruin our idea that we could just form in Wyoming. So you're coming to reality. What do we do?
Move to the great state of New Hampshire, right? No income tax, no sales tax. They have a property tax, but if you could find a good rental. But if you could move to the great state of New Hampshire, that might be a start.
So generally people are going to want to form either in their state or Delaware or somewhere else. Obviously, it's different for every situation. You should consult someone, but you can't just go to the hottest, cheapest place and pay no tax.
No, Wyoming's beautiful and all, but it's not, doing yourself any major favors. Although Wyoming's not a bad state to be incorporated in. It's not my favorite, but it's not a terrible state. They're better. You can incorporate your home state. There is something wrong with it. It just depends on what your goals are. But you can certainly incorporate in your home state. It's certainly cheaper because when you incorporate in another state and then do business, in a state, and this should be probably a caveat to anybody who registered in Wyoming. I mean, the first thing you should have noticed, if you lived in California and you registered in Wyoming, the first thing you're supposed to do is register your Wyoming business in California and pay that $800 fee. So that should have been a big alarm bell right there that this tax-free thing didn't work. But, the benefit of being able to register in your home state is obviously the fact that you wouldn't have to pay for 2 registrations, which could be, hundreds of dollars in savings. But, it comes down to what's important. If asset protection is important to you, you don't want to be a New York company, most likely. New York asset protection laws are not the best. They don't have charging order protection. Delaware, on the other hand, is one of my favorite states. And again, not legal advice. Everybody, has their own reasons. It costs a couple $100 a year. You got to deal with that. But Delaware's, has got a great body of corporate law. If you're selling your business, they take you more serious if you're a Delaware company, because like you just did the Wyoming LegalZoom special, as I referred to earlier, and, try to DIY it. So your buyers might take you a little bit more seriously and more comfortable because they want to do a deal. Delaware companies are just considered to be better, although with a grain of salt. But the bigger thing that I like about Delaware is that the charging order protection. So what is charging order? If you have a creditor going after you and you owe them money in a state without charging order protection, they can actually take control of your company, force you to fire everybody and liquidate it and take all the money and sell the assets and take all the money to satisfy their judgment. In a charging order protection state, they can't do that. They have a harder time doing that because, well, if it's in Delaware, the law says that they are limited to basically sitting on the sidelines and waiting for you to issue a distribution. So in other words, if the company makes a distribution, before any of the owners can get paid, they have to satisfy the judgment creditor first, right? Before, depending on a number of situations and depending, who's liable for what, and, but basically, you have to affirmatively make a distribution in order for a creditor to be paid. That's a big deterrent. If you have charging order protection, you're more likely to get a settlement with whoever's trying to come after you to take your insurance limits, right? Take your insurance policy limits. That's why we do these things, right? The state of New York, though, may refuse to honor charging order protection if you were to go to court. But we're not creating bulletproof asset protection strategies here. There's no such thing. And I would never tell you can, but you're creating barriers. So, if you could imagine, you're sitting on a track, like a track and field track, and on one side is you, and on the other side is a creditor, and the creditor's got their spear, and they're coming right at you to come and get you. Now, do you want to make it really easy for them, or do you want to put up hurdles and barriers? And that's what we're doing with asset protection. So I look at Delaware as the first and most basic and easiest barrier to put up between yourselves and potential creditors in the future, whether that stems from product liability, whether it stems from some other type of dispute you have, it's an easy one. And so I always like states like Delaware. Wyoming does have charging order protection, but I like Delaware law better. But, again, everyone's situation.
The idea here is you're not choosing it necessarily based off of taxes.
Oh, God, no.
Your taxes, don't think about the tax. Think about the laws in that state, because the way that the United States of America works, there's federal law and there's state law. And basically, where do you want to put your company? And like each state has their own rules. So where are the best rules that are going to be best for your business?
Absolutely.
That's essentially the summary there. And you want to go somewhere where they're going to help you sell it and help you protect it the best.
That's a great way of putting it. Exactly. So that's my take on Delaware. Talk to your lawyers. If you go on the internet, there's probably a million blog posts of people who like, Nevada versus Delaware. Everyone has their own opinion, but, the key is I don't know that many people out there who are saying form in New York. I can assure you that.
Or Florida.
Yeah. Florida has some other great asset protections, like we have we have a great homestead where,
rich people have houses in Florida.
That's right. That's why we have, we're a Florida law firm. I used to live in Florida full time. Yeah. You go down some of these really expensive areas of Florida.
That's why Naples is filled with mansions that are empty.
Naples, Boca Raton. It's absolutely, yes, they're vaults. They're financial vaults. I tell my sales tax people, I always say, if you're really that scared of California, maybe you should just move to Florida and buy a big house. Joking. But
just a funny joke. All right, guys, if you guys have any questions, let us know or talk to Paul.